Hi, this weekend I watched Napoleon, Ridley Scott's biopic of the notorious French dictator, chronicling the life of Napoleon Bonaparte from the French Revolution and the end of the Reign of Terror by Robespierre through to his exile on St. Helena and death in the early 1820s. Joaquin Phoenix plays Napoleon himself, and it's an odd portrayal because throughout Napoleon feels um, rather dull, something of a dullard, gifted in terms of his battle strategy and his military tactics, but not a particularly interesting or engaging person otherwise. And one wonders if this is deliberate or it's simply that a failure in the film's portrayal of its main character, that someone who was such a titan of history is not particularly engaging or charismatic. Um, the film is riddled with historical inaccuracies, as has been documented, and as Scott has angrily attacked those who have criticised the film for its inaccuracies, saying that it's only a movie. Well, it's a movie based notionally on reality. So, although some dramatic license is entirely reasonable, wholesale fictionalization of events. Um, Napoleon was a poor horseman. Here we see him repeatedly charging into battle on a horse. The Battle of Austerlitz being fought over a huge frozen lake, which wasn't true. Various other elements of his battles, his relationship with Josephine, um, all very heavily fictionalized, all very heavily altered from reality, simply for the purpose of making a better story. And as a result, a lot of the elements don't really make sense. Why would the army attack the French forces over a huge frozen lake when they know the French forces have artillery? Surely that's a huge vulnerability, as indeed it was, and which is why it didn't happen in real life. Um, it's a very handsomely mounted production. It's very expensive. It looks great, as all Ridley Scott films do. They never look bad. But the film does continue his habit of really not being able to tell a good script from a bad one. David Scarpa previously wrote All the Money in the World, which I thought was rather good, and the remake of The Day the Earth Stood Still, which was fine. Um, but this is not a particularly good, well written film. The acting is adequate. Vanessa Kirby as Josephine is fine, but there's very little of her inner life. Just as there is very little of Napoleon's inner life or examination of the forces that shaped him. His background, for example, of being um, minor nobility on Corsica is completely ignored, and instead it's suggested that he came from poverty, which is completely untrue. Um, the result is a film that is too long, firstly, for the uh, paucity of reality that's involved, and lacking in any real substance. If you want to tell the story of the man, you have to tell the story of the man, not just a very loosely based in fact chronicle of his bullet points. You have to actually examine the man, examine the forces that shaped him, examine why he was the way he was. And the film doesn't ever do that. I found it to be very disappointing, one of Scott's weaker films, certainly, and quite notable, in fact, in that an early scene which depicts the downfall of Robespierre at the end of his reign of terror over France in 1794 uh, depicts his arrest and botched suicide in a way that is less realistic than when it was depicted in Doctor Who in 1964 in a serial called The Reign of Terror, which actually sticks fairly rigidly to established fact, apart from, of course, the inclusion of various time travelers. So that this supposed definitive adaptation of the life of France's great military hero, apparently the long descended legacy of Stanley Kubrick's long planned production, which he'd hoped to follow up 2001 with, although it was shelved when the 1970 film Waterloo was a failure. This ultimate descendant of that very detailedly researched and planned project should have less historical relevance than its depiction in Doctor Who tells you a lot about whether or not you need to watch this, because you probably shouldn't.